My lazy wife won a lottery worth $73 million. Then she kicked me out saying, "Disappear," and vanished from the face of the earth. I don't care. You're useless now. Days later, the lottery company's lawyer laughed. Did you even read the terms and condition? My wife went pale because the terms said, you know that moment when your whole damn world flips upside down faster than a pancake on a Sunday morning? Yeah, well, mine happened on a Tuesday night while I was sitting in my raggedy lazy boy, nursing a beer that cost more than I wanted to admit, watching some mindless reality TV about people whose biggest problem was choosing between a yacht or a private jet. Real relatable stuff, right? The lottery drawing was on in the background, just white noise, really. Clarissa had been buying tickets religiously for 3 years, convinced that someday her lucky numbers would hit big. Lucky numbers, my ass. They were the dates we got married, her birthday, and some random crap she claimed came to her in a dream. I used to tease her about it, calling it her retirement plan, but after working double shifts at Martinez Auto Repair for the past 4 years, scraping together enough cash to keep our heads above water, I'd stopped finding it funny. Hell, I'd stopped finding much of anything funny. Then it happened. Oh my God. Oh my God. Darian. Clarissa's voice cut through the apartment like a fire alarm at 3 in the morning. She was standing in front of the TV, clutching that crumpled piece of paper like it was the Holy Grail, shaking so hard I thought she might vibrate right through the floor. The numbers. The numbers. I looked up from my beer, annoyed that she was interrupting the one moment of peace I'd had all week. What numbers, Clarissa? What are you? $73 million, she shrieked, and I swear to God, every dog in a 3-block radius started howling. Darian, we're rich. We're fucking rich. Now, let me tell you something about my wife Clarissa Monroe. Well, Clarissa Monroe Hayes, though she'd been dropping the Hayes part more and more lately. She's got a flair for the dramatic that would make Broadway actors jealous. The woman once cried for 20 minutes because Starbucks was out of pumpkin spice syrup. So when she started jumping around our living room like she'd just won the Super Bowl, my first instinct was skepticism wrapped in a thick layer of here we go again. But then I saw her face. Really saw it. The color had drained out completely, leaving her looking like she'd seen a ghost, and her hands were trembling so violently that the lottery ticket was making a sound like autumn leaves in the wind. This wasn't one of her usual performances. This was something else entirely. Let me see that, I said, setting down my beer and getting up from my chair. My knees creaked. Too many hours bent over car engines, too many years of living paycheck to paycheck, too many nights wondering if we'd make rent this month. She handed me the ticket, and I looked at the numbers on the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. Holy shit. Holy actual shit. The numbers matched. Every single goddamn one of them. Jesus Christ, Clarissa, I whispered, sinking back into my chair because my legs suddenly felt like they were made of jello. This is real. It's real, she screamed, doing some kind of victory dance that looked like she was having a seizure set to music. We're millionaires, Darian. Millionaires. I wanted to believe it was our miracle. God knows we needed one. After 7 years of marriage that felt more like a prison sentence with good behavior, after working myself into the ground fixing other people's cars while mine sat in the driveway held together with duct tape and prayer, after watching Clarissa spend money we didn't have on clothes she didn't need, while I ate ramen noodles for lunch 6 days a week, maybe, just maybe, life was finally cutting us a break. We celebrated that night like we were 21 again. Ordered pizza from Tony's, the good stuff, not the cardboard crap from the gas station, and I even splurged on a bottle of champagne. Well, champagne-flavored wine product. Close enough. Clarissa was already on her phone, posing with the winning ticket like it was her newborn baby, uploading photos to Instagram with captions like, "Dreams do come true," and "blessed beyond measure." I paid for the pizza, naturally. Some things never change, even when you're holding a ticket worth more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. That's when I noticed her brother Marcus lurking in the corner like a vulture circling roadkill. The guy had showed up about an hour after Clarissa's Instagram post. Funny how fast news travels when money's involved. He was whispering in her ear, pointing at the ticket, making gestures I couldn't quite read. Something about the way he was smirking made my stomach turn, but I pushed the feeling down. This was supposed to be a celebration, right? Our big break. Our chance to finally stop worrying about every damn dollar. Marcus thinks we should get a lawyer, Clarissa said, glancing over at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know, to handle all the legal stuff. Smart, I said, taking a sip of the fake champagne and trying to ignore the fact that it tasted like carbonated grape juice mixed with regret. We'll definitely need help with taxes and investments and all that. Marcus laughed, this low, ugly sound that reminded me of nails on a chalkboard. Oh, there's going to be a lot of changes around here, he said, not looking at me. A lot of changes. I should have paid more attention to that comment. I should have asked what he meant. But I was too busy staring at that lottery ticket, too busy calculating how many double shifts I'd never have to work again, too busy imagining a future where I didn't have to choose between fixing the dishwasher and buying groceries. The doorbell rang around 10 o'clock, and Clarissa's mother Eleanor swept in like she owned the place. Which, given that I'd been paying rent for the past 3 years while Clarissa found herself, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Eleanor Monroe was the kind of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and perfume that cost more than my monthly car payment. She kissed Clarissa on both cheeks, because apparently regular hugs were for peasants, and immediately started talking about mansions and yachts and European vacations. Not once did she look at me. Not once did she acknowledge the husband who'd been keeping her daughter's lights on and her fridge stocked while she spent her afternoons scrolling through designer catalogs and complaining about how boring her life was. I stood there holding the champagne bottle like some kind of butler, listening to Eleanor plan our future without consulting me about any of it. The first thing you need to do is find a proper financial advisor, Eleanor said, settling into my chair like she'd paid for it. Someone who understands how to handle serious money, not like those discount brokers who advertise on late-night television. Clarissa nodded eagerly, hanging on every word like her mother was dispensing wisdom from Mount Olympus instead of the same bullshit advice you could get from any financial planning website. What about property? Should we start looking at houses? Houses? Eleanor laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. Darling, with $73 million, you're looking at estates. Compounds. Properties with names, not addresses. I cleared my throat. Maybe we should slow down a bit. You know, take some time to figure out what we really want before we start making big decisions. Both women turned to look at me like I'd just suggested we donate the money to charity and move into a cardboard box. Eleanor's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Of course, she said in that tone rich people use when they're pretending to be polite. How thoughtful. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said I was an obstacle to be removed. I told myself the money might soften her heart. I told myself that once the shock wore off, once we got used to the idea of being wealthy, things would get better between us. I told myself that $73 million was enough to fix whatever had gone wrong in our marriage, enough to make Clarissa look at me the way she used to, back when I was her hero instead of her burden. I was wrong about all of it. But that night, standing in our crappy apartment with pizza grease on my fingers and fake champagne bubbling in my glass, watching my wife pose for selfies with our winning lottery ticket while her mother planned our new life and her brother whispered secrets in the corner. That night, I still believed in miracles. I should have known better. Miracles, it turns out, come with terms and conditions. And I was about to learn them the hard way. 3 days. That's how long it took for my fairy tale to turn into a goddamn horror movie. 3 measly days between, we're rich, honey, and get the hell out of my life. If that's not some kind of record for going from hero to zero, it should be. I woke up that Thursday morning thinking maybe we'd finally talk about our plans like actual married people. You know, sit down with some coffee, maybe even splurge on the good stuff from that fancy place downtown, and figure out how 2 broke-ass nobodies were supposed to handle more money than God. Stupid me, right? I was still operating under the delusion that we existed in Clarissa's vocabulary. The first red flag should have been the fact that she wasn't in bed when I woke up. Clarissa Monroe had never seen 9 a.m. from the conscious side in all the years I'd known her. The woman treated sleeping in like it was an Olympic sport she was training for. But there I was, rolling over to find cold sheets and the distant sound of hushed voices coming from the kitchen. I patted down the hallway in my boxers and the ratty Metallica t-shirt I'd been wearing since college, expecting to find her on the phone with some reporter or lottery official. Instead, I found Marcus leaning against my kitchen counter like he owned the place, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, the one that said, "World's okayest husband," that Clarissa had given me as a joke 3 Christmases ago. Funny how that joke wasn't so funny anymore. Clarissa was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, still in the silk pajamas she'd ordered online last week with money we didn't have. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, and her expression was colder than a Chicago winter. She looked like she'd been up for hours, which was weird because the woman usually needed at least 2 cups of coffee and a motivational speech just to remember her own name in the morning. "Morning," I said, trying to keep things light. "You guys are up early. Everything okay?" That's when they both turned to look at me, and I felt something twist in my gut. You know that feeling you get right before you're about to get fired, or dumped, or told you've got 6 months to live? That sick, anticipatory dread that starts in your stomach and spreads through your whole body like poison? Yeah, that. Marcus didn't say anything, just stood there with that smug little smirk he'd been wearing since Tuesday night. But Clarissa, Jesus, the look she gave me could have frozen hell over. It was like she was seeing me for the first time and finding me lacking in every possible way. "We need to talk," she said, and those 4 words hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. "Okay," I said slowly, glancing between her and her brother. "Should Marcus maybe?" "Marcus is staying," she cut me off. "He's helping me handle some things." "Handle some things. Not us handling some things. Now we need to handle some things." Her handling some things, with her brother's help. I was already being written out of the story, and I was too stupid to see it. We went into the bedroom, our bedroom, though I was starting to get the feeling it wasn't going to be ours much longer. Clarissa stood in the doorway like she was afraid to get too close to me, while Marcus lurked behind her like some kind of designer-wearing gargoyle. The whole setup felt rehearsed, like they'd been practicing this moment. "Darian," Clarissa started, and I could hear her voice shaking just a little. Not with emotion, though, with adrenaline. She was nervous, but not because she was about to break my heart. She was nervous because she was about to do something that required balls, and she'd never been particularly well equipped in that department. "I need you to leave," she continued, the words coming out in a rush like she was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she didn't get them all out at once. I blinked. "Leave? Like, leave the apartment? Are we going somewhere?" Marcus snorted, and Clarissa shot him a look that shut him up. For about 2 seconds. "No, Darian," she said, and now her voice was steadier, colder. "I need you to disappear. Vanish from the face of the earth. I don't care where you go or what you do, but I need you gone." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I actually took a step backward, like her voice had physical force behind it. "What the hell are you talking about, Clarissa? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" "You're useless now," she said, and Jesus Christ, the casual way she said it was somehow worse than if she'd screamed it. Like it was just a fact, as obvious as saying the sky was blue or water was wet. "I have money. Real money. I don't need you to pay the bills or fix the car or pretend like you're some kind of provider. I can hire people to do all of that, and they'll do it better than you ever could." I felt like I'd been sucker punched. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of working my ass off to keep us afloat, 7 years of believing that we were a team, and she was dismissing all of it like I'd been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. "This is insane," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Clarissa, this is our money. We won this together. We're married, for Christ's sake." That's when Marcus decided to chime in. "Actually, bro," he said, drawing out the word bro like it tasted bad in his mouth. "Clarissa bought the ticket. Clarissa picked the numbers. Clarissa's name is on all the paperwork. Far as I can see, this is her money." I stared at him, then at her. "Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious?" Clarissa reached into her purse, the new Louis Vuitton one she'd bought online yesterday with money from our joint account, and pulled out a wad of cash. She tossed it onto the bed like she was tipping a bellhop, and I watched the bills scatter across our comforter like confetti at the world's most depressing party. $500, she said. "That should last you until you figure out your next move. $500. For 7 years of marriage." For all those double shifts, all those nights I came home exhausted and covered in motor oil while she complained about being bored. For every time I chose to fix something myself instead of hiring someone because we couldn't afford it. For every sacrifice I'd made to keep us going. $500 fucking. Marcus was laughing now, not even trying to hide it anymore. "Come on, Clarissa. Don't be cruel. Give the man $1,000. He's been a good little worker bee. That's when something inside me snapped. You piece of shit, I said, taking a step toward him. You think this is funny? Marcus straightened up, and for a second I thought he might actually try to throw hands. But Clarissa stepped between us, and the look on her face stopped me cold. Don't, she said quietly. Just don't. Take the money and go, Darian. Make this easy on both of us. Easy on both of us. Like I was the one making things difficult by existing in my own goddamn marriage. I looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of the woman I'd married. The woman who used to steal fries off my plate and laugh at my terrible jokes. The woman who cried during Hallmark commercials and made me watch romantic comedies even though we both knew I hated them. The woman who used to tell me I was her best friend, her partner, her everything. She was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for a while, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Maybe she'd never really been there at all, and I'd just been in love with the idea of her. Either way, the person standing in front of me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. 7 years, I said finally. 7 goddamn years, Clarissa. I know, she said, and for just a second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold, calculating look she'd been wearing all morning. But that's over now. I nodded slowly, because what else was I supposed to do? Fight for a woman who'd already written me off? Beg someone who saw me as useless to let me stick around? Fuck that. I had more pride than that. Not much more, but enough. I started packing while they watched from the doorway. 2 suitcases and a shoebox of photos. That's what 7 years of marriage boiled down to. Pictures of my parents before the car crash that took them both when I was 22. Photos of Clarissa and me from better times, when she still smiled at me instead of through me. A picture of Richard Hayes, the landlord I'd worked for briefly before the auto shop, shaking my hand after I'd fixed his tenant's plumbing emergency. Darian, you're a good man, he'd told me that day. I'd believed him then. I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. When I zipped up the last suitcase, I turned around to find Clarissa still standing there. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it again. Marcus had disappeared, probably off to celebrate his sister's newfound fortune and single status. Clarissa, I started, but she shook her head. Just go, Darian. Please. So I did. I picked up my 2 suitcases and my shoebox of memories, left the $500 scattered on the bed like the insult it was, and walked out of the apartment I'd been paying for since we moved in together. She didn't follow me. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to hear her voice calling my name, to hear some sign that maybe she'd realized what she was throwing away. But the only sound was the echo of my footsteps in the hallway and the distant hum of traffic outside. 7 years, gone in a sentence. And the worst part? I was starting to think she'd been planning this longer than I wanted to admit. The Sunrise Motel was about as far from actual sunrise as you could get without traveling to the dark side of the moon. The neon sign flickered like it was having a seizure, missing half the letters so it read Sun ISEMOL in sickly pink light that made everything look like it was dying of some exotic disease. The parking lot was cracked asphalt held together by weeds and broken dreams, populated by cars that had seen better decades and a few that looked like they'd been abandoned since the Clinton administration. $45 a night, cash only, no questions asked. That was the deal Ralph offered when I dragged my sorry ass through the door at 11:30 p.m., looking like something the cat had dragged in and then rejected for being too pathetic. Ralph was the kind of guy who'd probably seen every sob story in the book twice and had stopped caring somewhere around the Bush presidency. The first one. How long you staying? He asked without looking up from his newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, like we were living in 1995. The sports section was open, and I could see he was checking lottery numbers. Because apparently, everyone in this goddamn city was obsessed with winning money they didn't deserve. Not sure, I said, sliding 2 20s and a 5 across the counter. Probably just a few days while I figure things out. Ralph glanced at me then, taking in the wrinkled clothes, the 2 mismatched suitcases, and the general aura of a man whose life had just exploded in his face. He'd seen this movie before. Room 14, he said, handing me a key attached to a plastic diamond that probably cost less than the gas I'd used driving here. Checkout's at 11. Ice machine's busted, vending machine eats quarters, and if you hear screaming from room 12, don't worry about it. Margie just has nightmares. Great. A haunted motel room next to a woman with PTSD. This day just kept getting better. Room 14 was exactly what you'd expect from a place that charged $45 and probably hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. The wallpaper was peeling in strips that looked like dead skin, revealing patches of drywall underneath that were stained with God knows what. The carpet was brown. Not originally, I suspected, but life had a way of making everything brown eventually. It squished slightly under my feet, and I decided I really didn't want to know why. The bed dominated the room like a sagging monument to every broken promise ever made. The mattress had a depression in the middle that suggested the last guest had been roughly the size and weight of a small elephant, and the comforter was one of those generic motel patterns designed to hide stains while simultaneously creating new ones. I sat down on the edge and immediately sank about 6 inches, like the bed was trying to swallow me alive. Which, honestly, didn't sound like the worst option at that point. The bathroom was a masterpiece of despair. The shower had more mold than a college dorm room. The toilet rocked when you sat on it, and the mirror was cracked in a spider web pattern that made my reflection look like a cubist painting of depression. I splashed some water on my face and immediately regretted it when I realized the water smelled like sulfur and had a slight brown tint. I lay back on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling where someone had thoughtfully carved, "Life sucks, and then you die," into the acoustic tiles. Probably with a butter knife, judging by the jagged edges. Inspiring stuff. Really set the mood for what was turning out to be the longest night of my life. The walls in this place were about as thick as tissue paper, so I got to enjoy the full surround sound experience of my fellow guests' personal dramas. To my left, some couple was having the kind of fight that starts with accusations about who forgot to buy milk and ends with someone threatening to burn down everything the other person holds dear. To my right, someone was watching what sounded like a game show at full volume, with occasional bursts of applause and some host with an annoyingly cheerful voice asking contestants to come on down. And above me, someone was apparently practicing for the World Bowling Championship using furniture instead of bowling balls. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine Clarissa in whatever 5-star hotel she'd probably booked by now. Probably ordering room service champagne and laughing with Marcus about how easy it had been to get rid of me. Maybe she was already planning her new life. The mansions Eleanor had been talking about, the yachts, the European vacations. Maybe she was on the phone with some real estate agent, describing her dream house without any mention of the husband who'd made it all possible. The husband she'd called useless. That word kept bouncing around my skull like a pinball, hitting every insecurity I'd ever had and lighting them up like a Christmas tree. Useless. After 7 years of working my ass off to keep us afloat, after all those double shifts and side jobs and nights spent fixing everything in our apartment because we couldn't afford to hire someone else. After choosing her happiness over mine so many times I'd forgotten what mine even looked like. Useless. Maybe she was right. What good was I, really? I fixed cars for a living. Not exactly a glamorous profession. I didn't have a college degree, didn't speak multiple languages, didn't know the difference between good wine and the stuff that came in a box. I was just some blue-collar schmuck who'd gotten lucky enough to marry up, and now that she didn't need me to pay the bills, what was the point of keeping me around? My phone buzzed. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking maybe it was Clarissa calling to apologize, to say she'd made a mistake, to ask me to come home. But it was just a notification from our bank. Sorry, her bank now, letting me know that our joint account had been closed and a new account opened in her name only. Efficient. I had to give her credit for that. I turned off the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand, where it landed next to a Bible that looked like it had been through a war and a laminated card advertising discreet companionship with a phone number that had been partially scratched out. The Bible's pages were yellowed and dog-eared, like a lot of desperate people had been looking for answers in this room over the years. I wondered if any of them had found what they were looking for. The couple next door had moved on from accusations about milk to accusations about infidelity, their voices rising and falling like some twisted opera. The woman was crying now, big sobbing wails that cut through the thin walls like knives. The man was shouting back, his voice slurred with alcohol or exhaustion or both. I found myself listening despite myself, caught up in their drama because it was easier than dealing with my own. At least they were fighting. At least they still cared enough to scream at each other. Clarissa hadn't even bothered to raise her voice when she destroyed my life. She delivered the news like she was reading the weather report, calm, cool, and completely detached from the devastation she was causing. That's when something started gnawing at me. A tiny voice in the back of my head that refused to be silenced by self-pity and cheap motel despair. Something about the whole situation didn't add up. Not the lottery win itself. That was real enough. I'd seen the numbers with my own eyes. But something about the way Clarissa and Marcus had handled everything afterward. The whispering, the secrecy, the rushed timeline. Clarissa had never been one for reading fine print. Hell, the woman couldn't be bothered to read the instructions on a frozen dinner, let alone the terms and conditions on a multi-million-dollar lottery ticket. She was the type who clicked "I agree" without scrolling through anything, who signed contracts without reading them, who bought extended warranties on everything because the salesperson smiled at her. But she'd been waving that ticket around like she owned the world, talking about claiming the money like it was already hers. Never once mentioning terms, conditions, or legal requirements. Never once suggesting we should read through the paperwork together or consult a lawyer about the best way to handle things. Marcus, on the other hand, had shown up awfully fast after her Instagram post. And he'd been whispering in her ear ever since, filling her head with ideas about lawyers and legal stuff and changes. What kind of changes? And why was he so interested in helping his sister suddenly? The same Marcus who'd borrowed $300 from us last Christmas and never paid it back, who only called when he needed something, who'd spent most of our wedding reception hitting on the bridesmaids. I sat up on the Saga mattress, ignoring the way it creaked like a haunted house. That spark of suspicion was growing brighter, cutting through the fog of heartbreak and self-doubt like a lighthouse in a storm. Maybe I was grasping at straws. Maybe I was just looking for some way to make sense of how quickly my life had fallen apart. But something felt wrong about the whole thing. Really wrong. And if there's one thing 7 years of fixing cars had taught me, it's that when something feels wrong, it usually is. You learn to trust that feeling when you're dealing with machinery. That little voice that tells you the engine sounds off, that the brakes feel spongy, that something's not right even when everything looks fine on the surface. Right now, that voice was screaming. I grabbed my phone and turned it back on, ignoring the 17 new notifications from apps I didn't care about. The Lottery Commission had a website. They had rules, regulations, fine print that nobody ever bothered to read. If I was going to spend the night in this hellhole anyway, I might as well do something productive with my insomnia. Outside, the neon sign flickered again, casting pink shadows across the walls like some kind of diseased aurora borealis. The couple next door had finally exhausted themselves, their fight dissolving into the kind of angry silence that's somehow worse than screaming. The game show host was still cheerfully encouraging people to make terrible decisions for money. And I was about to start reading lottery regulations like my life depended on it. Because maybe, just maybe, it did. The next morning, I woke up in that godforsaken motel room feeling like I'd been hit by a truck driven by my own stupidity, then backed over for good measure. My neck was twisted into some kind of pretzel shape from sleeping on what I can only assume was a mattress stuffed with broken dreams and concrete blocks. But for the first time since Tuesday night, I had something resembling a plan. And let me tell you, having a plan when you're living in a place that charges by the hour feels like finding a $20 bill in your old jeans. I counted the crumpled bills in my wallet, $37 and change, which was just enough to get me downtown and maybe grab a cup of coffee that didn't taste like it had been filtered through a gym sock. The bus fare was $2.50 each way, which left me with about $32 to work with. Living large, baby. The ride downtown took 45 minutes through the armpit of the city, past pawn shops and payday loan places and billboards advertising personal injury lawyers with names like Hurt, call Bert. Real classy stuff. I sat in the back, trying not to think about how I'd gone from having a wife and a home to riding public transportation with my worldly possessions stuffed into a backpack that had seen better decades. The State Lottery Commission building was exactly what you'd expect from a government office that dealt with people's dreams on a daily basis. All glass and chrome, and the kind of sterile corporate aesthetic that said, "We take your money very seriously, but we'd rather not deal with you personally." It was the kind of place where hope went to get processed through bureaucratic machinery and came out the other side as tax revenue. I walked through the automatic doors into a lobby that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never experienced joy and wanted to make sure nobody else did either. Everything was white and gray and beige, the kind of color scheme that made you want to check your pulse to make sure you were still alive. There were motivational posters on the walls featuring happy families holding oversized checks, which felt like a particularly cruel joke given my current circumstances. The receptionist looked like she'd been sitting behind that desk since the lottery was invented, wearing the kind of smile that came with her paycheck and disappeared the moment she clocked out. Her nameplate said, Brenda, and Brenda looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else doing literally anything else. Can I help you? She asked in the tone of someone who really hoped the answer was no. I need to see someone about a lottery claim, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My wife won $73 million. Brenda's expression didn't change, which told me she'd heard every sob story in the book and had stopped caring somewhere around the Carter administration. Congratulations. Do you have your claim number? That's the thing, I said, feeling sweat start to gather under my arms despite the Arctic air conditioning. I don't think she filed it correctly. We're married, and I think there might be some legal issues with how she handled the paperwork. Now that got Brenda's attention. She looked up from her computer screen and really saw me for the first time. The rumpled clothes, the desperate expression, the general aura of a man who'd been sleeping in a place that rented rooms by the hour. What kind of legal issues? She asked, and I could hear the wheels turning in her head. This was either going to be entertaining or a complete waste of her time, and she was trying to figure out which. Marriage law stuff, I said, because honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of legal issues they might be. I just knew that something felt wrong about the whole situation, and I was hoping someone smarter than me could figure out what. Brenda stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her phone. Charles, I've got someone down here you might want to talk to. Says his wife filed a lottery claim incorrectly. She paused, listening. Yeah, he looks exactly like what you'd expect. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in an elevator that played the kind of music that made you question your life choices, heading up to the legal department. The doors opened on the 7th floor, and I found myself face to face with a hallway lined with offices where people in expensive suits made more money in a month than I'd made in the past year. Charles Whitmore's office was at the end of the hall, behind a door that had his name etched in gold letters that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The man himself was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd clawed his way to the top of the government food chain. Silver hair that looked like it had been styled by angels, a suit that probably cost more than my car, and eyes that had seen every scheme, scam, and sob story in the book. He was on the phone when I knocked, gesturing for me to sit down while he finished what sounded like a conversation about tax implications and investment strategies. I sat in a chair that was more comfortable than my bed at the motel and tried not to look like I was about to steal something. So, Charles said when he hung up, leaning back in his chair and studying me like I was a particularly interesting specimen in a jar. Brenda tells me you think your wife made some mistakes on her lottery claim. Maybe, I said, because suddenly I felt like an idiot for being there. I don't know. Something doesn't feel right about the whole thing. Charles laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh that suggested he'd heard this exact story more times than he could count. Let me guess. Your wife won the lottery, decided she didn't need you anymore, and kicked you out. Now you're hoping there's some legal loophole that'll get you back in the game. I felt my face burning. It's not like that, isn't it? Charles asked, but his tone wasn't cruel. If anything, he sounded almost sympathetic. How long have you been married? 7 years. Kids? No. Joint bank accounts? Yeah. I mean, we did. She cleaned them out. Charles nodded like he was checking boxes on some internal list. And when did she file the claim? I don't know exactly. Sometime in the past few days, I guess. She kicked me out Wednesday morning, and by then she was already talking about mansions and yachts like the money was already in the bank. That's when Charles's expression changed. The amused, seen it all look disappeared, replaced by something sharper, more focused. He leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested in what I had to say. She kicked you out Wednesday morning, he repeated slowly. And she was already talking about the money being available? Yeah. She and her brother were making all these plans, talking about financial advisors and property managers and all this stuff like they'd already figured out how to access the money. Charles was quiet for a long moment, just staring at me with those sharp lawyer eyes. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder that looked like it could choke a horse. "Did you ever read the terms and conditions for the lottery?" he asked. "No. I mean, Clarissa bought the tickets. I never really paid attention to that stuff." Charles slid the folder across the desk toward me. "You should have." I opened the folder and immediately felt like I was drowning in legal jargon. Pages and pages of tiny print that talked about everything from tax obligations to claim procedures to residency requirements. But Charles reached over and flipped to a specific page, pointing to a section that was highlighted in yellow. "Read that," he said. I squinted at the text, trying to make sense of the legal language. And there, buried in a paragraph that would have put a philosophy professor to sleep, was a sentence that made my heart start pounding like a bass drum at a rock concert. Any prize over $50 million must be claimed jointly by spouses unless legally separated prior to the draw date. I read out loud, my voice barely above a whisper. Charles nodded. "That's right. Joint claim. Both spouses have to sign off on it. Both spouses are entitled to equal shares, and both spouses are equally responsible for taxes and legal obligations." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. So if she filed the claim without me, then she committed fraud, Charles finished. Federal fraud, to be specific. The kind that comes with prison time and massive financial penalties. I felt like someone had just told me I'd won the lottery all over again. Except this time it was even better because this time it came with a side order of justice served ice cold. But she already filed. The money's already. "The money isn't going anywhere," Charles interrupted. "Claims this large don't get processed overnight. There are background checks, verification procedures, waiting periods. The earliest she could see a dime would be 6 weeks from the filing date, and that's if everything was filed correctly. Which, based on what you're telling me, it wasn't." He picked up his phone and dialed an extension. "Maria? I need you to pull the file on the Monroe claim. $73 million jackpot from Tuesday night." He paused, listening. "Yes, that one. Bring it to my office." He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You might be smarter than you look." "I'm definitely prettier," I said, which earned me another laugh. "We'll see about that when we're done with your wife." Maria turned out to be a paralegal who looked like she could bench press a filing cabinet and enjoyed every minute of her job. She brought in another folder, this one even thicker than the first, and spread the contents across Charles's desk like she was dealing cards at the world's most expensive poker game. "Monroe, Clarissa," Maria said, consulting her notes. "Filed Wednesday morning. Claimed single status. Listed no dependents or joint financial obligations." Charles looked at me. "Were you married on Tuesday night when the drawing took place?" "Yeah. Still am, technically." "Joint financial obligations? Joint bank accounts, shared property, anything like that?" "Everything. The apartment lease is in both our names. We've had joint checking and savings accounts for 5 years. She's on my health insurance. I'm the beneficiary on her life insurance policy. We're about as legally entangled as two people can get." Charles and Maria exchanged a look that made me think of sharks smelling blood in the water. "Maria," Charles said slowly, "please tell me you have surveillance footage of Ms. Monroe filing her claim." Maria grinned like Christmas had come early. Full HD video, complete with audio. She was very emphatic about being single and having no financial obligations to anyone else. I felt something that might have been hope blooming in my chest for the first time since Tuesday night. "So what does this mean?" Charles leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a movie villain who'd just realized his master plan was coming together. "It means, my friend, that your wife has just handed you the biggest gift of your life. She's committed lottery fraud, perjury, and probably half a dozen other federal crimes I haven't even thought of yet. And that means you don't just have rights to half that money. You have power, real power, the kind that comes with being able to send someone to federal prison for the next decade." I sat there for a moment, letting that sink in. Clarissa had called me useless. She'd thrown me away like yesterday's garbage, confident that her $73 million made her untouchable. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. "So what's our next move?" I asked. Charles smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me glad he was on my side. "We're going to introduce your wife to the concept of consequences. And if we do this right, she's going to lose everything she tried to steal." For the first time in 4 days, I felt like I could breathe again. Turns out sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are just setting themselves up for a longer fall. Charles wasn't done dropping bombshells on me, which was good because I was starting to develop a taste for having my entire worldview rearranged every few minutes. He picked up his phone again and dialed another extension, this time with the kind of grin that suggested he was about to introduce me to someone who would either save my life or scare me into an early grave. "Rosa? You busy?" he said into the phone, leaning back in his leather chair like a man who was thoroughly enjoying his work. "I've got a case that's right up your alley. Lottery fraud, arrogant spouse, probably some money laundering thrown in for good measure." He paused, listening to whatever Rosa was saying on the other end. "Yeah, it's exactly as entertaining as it sounds. Can you come up here?" He hung up and looked at me with the expression of a man who'd just called in the cavalry. "You're about to meet Rosa Delgado, the best private investigator in the state and probably the smartest person in this building. She specializes in financial fraud cases, and she has a particular fondness for taking down people who think they're too clever to get caught." "Is she expensive?" I asked, because let's face it, my current net worth was somewhere in the neighborhood of $32 and a half-eaten pack of gum. "She works on contingency for cases like this," Charles said, "which means she doesn't get paid unless we win. And trust me, Rosa doesn't take cases she can't win." 5 minutes later, the door opened, and in walked a woman who looked like she could arm wrestle a grizzly bear and win by submission. Rosa Delgado was maybe 5'6" in her sensible shoes, but she carried herself like someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve with the right combination of brains, persistence, and sheer bloody-minded determination. Her handshake could have cracked walnuts, and her eyes had the kind of sharp intelligence that made me feel like she was reading my entire life story just by looking at me. "So you're the poor bastard whose wife tried to steal $73 million, she said by way of introduction, settling into the chair next to mine like she owned the place. "Charles, fill me in on the basics." "Your wife's an idiot. Her brother's probably the brains of the operation, and they think they're smarter than the legal system." "Did I miss anything?" "Her mother's involved too," I said. "Eleanor Monroe. She showed up the night we won, already making plans like she was going to be managing the money." Rosa's eyes lit up like I'd just told her Christmas was coming early this year. "A family conspiracy. Even better. The more people involved, the more mistakes they make, and the easier it is to prove intent to defraud." She pulled out a tablet and started typing notes with the speed of someone who'd been doing this for a very long time. "Tell me everything about Tuesday night. Every detail, every conversation, every look that seemed off. People always think they're being subtle when they're planning to screw someone over, but they're usually about as subtle as a brick through a window." So I told her everything. The lottery drawing, Clarissa's reaction, Marcus showing up like he'd been waiting for the call, Eleanor arriving in her pearls and perfume, and immediately taking charge of our financial future. The whispered conversations, the way Marcus kept smirking at me, the way Clarissa started talking about her money instead of our money almost immediately. Rosa listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes, but mostly just absorbing everything I said like a sponge soaking up water. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Your wife's been planning this for a while," she said matter-of-factly. "The logistics alone, knowing who to call, what forms to file, how to structure the claim to exclude you, that's not something you figure out in 3 days. She's been thinking about this scenario, probably for months." That hit me like a punch to the gut, because it meant Clarissa hadn't just been waiting for an excuse to leave me. She'd been actively planning for it, fantasizing about a future where I didn't exist. Every time she bought a lottery ticket, she'd been imagining what she'd do when she won, and apparently, what she'd do was throw away 7 years of marriage like it had never happened. "The good news," Rosa continued, "is that arrogant people make stupid mistakes, and your wife seems to have cornered the market on both arrogance and stupidity. Charles showed you the legal requirements for joint claims." "Yeah, she had to file jointly, and she didn't. Right? But that's just the beginning. If she really filed a false claim, if she really stated she was single and had no financial obligations, then she didn't just break lottery rules. She committed perjury on a federal document, which is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And if she tries to access that money based on false information, that's wire fraud, which can get you 20 years. Charles leaned forward. "The question is proving intent. We need to show that she knew she was lying when she filed the claim, not that she just made an honest mistake. Oh, that's the easy part, Rosa said with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. Give me 48 hours, and I'll have enough evidence to bury her in court documents. These people always think they're the first ones to come up with these schemes, but they never are, and they never learn from other people's mistakes. She stood up and started pacing around the office like a general planning a military campaign. First, I'm going to pull all the surveillance footage from the Lottery Commission. Every camera, every angle, every second of your wife filing her claim. If she looked nervous, if she hesitated when answering questions, if she had coaching materials with her, I'll find it. What kind of coaching materials? I asked. Notes, printouts of legal advice, text messages with instructions from her brother. Trust me, amateurs always leave a paper trail. They can't help themselves. She made another note on her tablet. Second, I'm going to pull her bank records for the past 6 months. If she's been planning this, there will be evidence. Payments to lawyers, research into lottery law, maybe even practice runs with smaller amounts. Charles nodded approvingly. What about the brother and mother? Oh, they're next on my list. Marcus Monroe has a business degree but no visible means of income, which tells me he's either trust fund trash or he's working angles that won't look good under scrutiny. And Eleanor Monroe. Rosa paused to check something on her tablet. Eleanor Monroe has a history of litigation against family members. 3 separate inheritance disputes in the past 10 years, all settled out of court. She's got a pattern of trying to manipulate family money, and patterns are exactly what prosecutors love to see. I felt like I was watching a master class in how to destroy someone's life in the most legally satisfying way possible. How long will all this take? The initial investigation? Like I said, 48 hours for the basics. But here's the thing. We don't want to just prove she committed fraud. We want to prove she committed fraud while also being stupid enough to leave evidence everywhere. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position when it comes time to negotiate. Negotiate what? I asked. Charles and Rosa exchanged a look that made me think of wolves deciding how to divide up a particularly juicy deer. Your wife stole $73 million, Charles said. But fraud cases can tie up assets for years while they work their way through the court system. If we play this right, we can get her to agree to a settlement that gives you everything you're entitled to plus damages, in exchange for not pursuing criminal charges that could send her to federal prison. So I get the money and she stays out of jail? If she's smart, yes. If she's stupid, Rosa shrugged. Well, federal prison food isn't that bad, I hear. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my blood pressure spike about 50 points. It was from an unknown number, but the message was clear enough. Saw the news about your lottery win. When can we expect to see you and your beautiful wife on TV for the winner's interview? I showed the message to Charles and Rosa. Rosa read it and started laughing. Not a pleasant laugh, but the kind of laugh that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. Your wife's been doing interviews? She asked. I don't know. I've been staying at a motel, trying to avoid reporters. Rosa was already typing on her tablet. Let's see what the internet has to say about Clarissa Monroe, lottery winner. Her fingers flew across the screen for about 30 seconds. Then she stopped and grinned like she'd just found buried treasure. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. She turned the tablet around so Charles and I could see the screen. There was Clarissa, standing in front of our apartment building, being interviewed by a local news crew. She was wearing the new outfit she'd bought online, probably with money from our joint account, and holding up the winning lottery ticket like it was the Declaration of Independence. I've always believed that hard work and positive thinking pay off, she was saying to the reporter, with the kind of sincere expression that actors spend years learning to fake. This money is going to change my life completely. I plan to travel, maybe start a business, really live the life I've always dreamed of. And what about your husband? The reporter asked. How is he handling this incredible stroke of luck? Clarissa's expression flickered for just a second, so fast you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. But Rosa was looking for it, and she caught it like a baseball scout spotting a future Hall of Famer. I'm recently single, Clarissa said smoothly. This is really a fresh start for me in every way. Charles whistled low. She just lied on television about her marital status. In front of witnesses. While holding the lottery ticket, she fraudulently claimed. Gets better, Rosa said, still scrolling through the search results. Look at this. She'd found another interview, this one from yesterday, where Clarissa was talking about her plans to buy a mansion and start a charitable foundation. In this one, she specifically says she's been single for over a year and that this one validates her decision to focus on herself instead of supporting other people. I stared at the screen, watching my wife of 7 years tell the world that she'd been single for over a year, supporting other people. Like I was some kind of charity case she'd finally gotten tired of funding. Can we use this? I asked. Can we use this? Rosa repeated, looking at me like I'd just asked if water was wet. Darian, your wife just committed perjury on camera, in front of thousands of witnesses, while providing clear evidence of her intent to defraud the lottery system. This isn't just evidence. This is a prosecutor's wet dream. She stood up and started gathering her things. I'm going to get started on this right now. Charles, can you pull the original claim documents and get them copied for me? Already on it, Charles said, reaching for his phone. Rosa headed for the door, then stopped and turned back to me. Darian, I want you to do exactly what you've been doing. Stay at the motel, keep a low profile, don't contact your wife or her family. Let them think they've won. Let them get comfortable. The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make. And then, she grinned, and I finally understood why Charles had looked so pleased when he called her. And then we're going to teach your wife that stealing $73 million is easy. Keeping it when you've broken half a dozen federal laws in the process? That's the hard part. After she left, I sat in Charles's office for another hour, going over the legal implications of everything we'd discovered. By the time I left, my head was spinning with terms like criminal conspiracy and asset forfeiture and federal sentencing guidelines. But for the first time since Tuesday night, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Clarissa had called me useless, but she'd forgotten one important thing. Sometimes the people you throw away know exactly where all the bodies are buried. And sometimes they're friends with people who know how to dig them up. 5 days. That's how long it took for Clarissa to go from kicking me out of our crappy apartment to living like some kind of discount royalty in a mansion that probably cost more per month than I'd made in the past year. Rosa had been tracking her every move through social media, bank records, and what I can only describe as professional-grade stalking, so I knew exactly where to find her when Charles finally gave me the green light. The house was in Belmont Hills, the kind of neighborhood where people had names like Thurston and Muffy, and thought poor people were just rich people who weren't trying hard enough. It was one of those modern monstrosities with more glass than a greenhouse and enough marble to supply a small cemetery. The kind of place that screamed, I have money and I want everyone to know it, in architectural form. I stood at the front door holding Charles's injunction in one hand and a set of keys in the other. Keys that had been issued by court order after Rosa's investigation had turned up enough evidence to choke a horse. My heart was pounding like I'd just run a marathon, but for the first time in a week, it wasn't from despair. It was from anticipation. The doorbell played some kind of classical music that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Through the glass, I could see Clarissa pacing around what looked like a living room the size of a basketball court, gesticulating wildly while talking on her phone. She was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, designer stuff that probably cost more than my car. When she saw me through the glass, her face went through about 6 different expressions in 2 seconds flat. Surprise, confusion, anger, and finally settling on the kind of rage usually reserved for people who'd just been told their favorite TV show had been canceled. She yanked open the door so hard I thought she might pull it off its hinges. What the hell are you doing here, Darian? Living in my house, I said, pushing past her into the foyer that was roughly the size of our old apartment. She followed me, sputtering like a broken lawn sprinkler. Your house? Are you insane? This is my house. I'm renting it with my money. Actually, I said, pulling out the injunction, according to this court order, it's our house. Rented with our money. You know, the money you try to steal from me. The phone call she'd been having apparently involved screaming at some jeweler about a custom necklace, because I could hear a tiny voice on the other end saying something about payment processing issues and declined transactions. That's when it happened. The beautiful, perfect moment I'd been waiting for all week. I'm sorry, ma'am. The voice on the phone said, loud enough for me to hear, but your credit card has been declined. All of your credit cards, actually, and your bank accounts appear to be frozen. Clarissa's face went through the color spectrum like a mood ring having a seizure. Red to white to green, and back to red again. She looked at her phone like it had just told her the world was ending. "You're lying," she whispered into the phone. "Check again. Check all of them." But I was already opening the folder Charles had given me, pulling out copies of the court orders that had frozen her accounts, her credit lines, and basically every financial resource she thought she had access to. Rosa had been busy, little b, and her investigation had given the court everything they needed to lock down Clarissa's fraudulent empire faster than you could say federal crime. "Clarissa," I said, trying to keep my voice level even though I wanted to do a victory dance on her marble floors, "we need to talk." She hung up the phone and turned to look at me with the kind of expression you'd see on someone who'd just realized they were standing in a minefield. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, which was technically true. "You did this all by yourself when you decided to commit lottery fraud." That's when she started laughing. Not the good kind of laughing, but the kind that suggested someone had finally snapped and was now operating on pure panic and desperation. "Lottery fraud? Are you out of your mind? I won that money fair and square. Those are my numbers, my ticket, Our ticket," I interrupted. "Our numbers. Our money. We were married when you bought that ticket, Clarissa. Legally married. Which means legally, half of everything belongs to me." I opened the folder and pulled out the paperwork that would change both our lives forever. Copies of her claim forms where she'd sworn under penalty of perjury that she was single. Screenshots of her Instagram posts bragging about her single life and my lottery winnings. Bank records showing her attempts to move money into accounts I had no access to. "You signed documents stating you were single," I said, laying them out on her fancy glass coffee table like I was dealing cards. "You lied to federal officials about your marital status. You tried to defraud me out of my legal share of the winnings." Her hands were shaking so badly now that she couldn't hold the paper steady. She kept looking from the documents to me and back again, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half its pieces. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my money. I bought the ticket. I picked the numbers. You committed fraud," I said. "Federal fraud. The kind that comes with prison time." That's when Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a chainsaw through butter. "What is all this noise about?" Clarissa's mother swept into the room wearing the kind of outfit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, her pearls clicking together like a rosary made of arrogance. She took one look at me standing in her daughter's stolen mansion, and her expression could have frozen hell over. "You," she said, pointing at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "What are you doing in my daughter's home?" "Reading her the charges," I said, holding up the last document in the folder. "Would you like to hear them? Lottery fraud, perjury, attempted money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud. The list goes on." Eleanor's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all the color had just drained out of her face. She looked at Clarissa, then at the papers scattered across the table, then back at me. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "You can't just come in here and—" "Actually, I can," I said, pulling out the keys. "Court order. This house, these accounts, all of it is frozen until the investigation is complete. And since I'm the legal co-owner of the lottery winnings, I have every right to be here." I looked around the room at the expensive furniture, the artwork that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 5 years, the champagne glasses still sitting on the counter from whatever celebration they'd been having before I arrived. "Nice place you've got here," I said. "Too bad it's all paid for with stolen money." For the first time since I'd walked through that door, Clarissa was completely speechless. And for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe again. 2 nights later, I was sitting in what used to be Clarissa's stolen mansion, drinking what used to be her overpriced scotch, and reading what used to be her copies of Architectural Digest, when the front door burst open like someone was staging a home invasion. The sound of Eleanor's heels clicking across the marble foyer was like machine gun fire, and I knew I was about to have the conversation I'd been both dreading and looking forward to since this whole mess started. Eleanor Monroe swept into the living room like a one-woman hurricane, her pearls rattling with barely contained fury and her perfume arriving a full 5 seconds before she did. Behind her, Clarissa skulked like a scolded teenager who'd been caught shoplifting and was hoping her mommy could make all the bad consequences go away. "You," Eleanor said, pointing one perfectly manicured finger at me like she was casting a curse, are going to fix this situation immediately. I looked up from my magazine. An article about sustainable kitchen designs that cost more than most people's cars, and tried not to smile. The past 48 hours had been a masterclass in watching privileged people discover that money couldn't actually solve every problem, especially when that money had been obtained through federal crimes. "Evening, Eleanor," I said, taking a sip of scotch that probably cost more per ounce than I used to make per hour. "Nice to see you too. Can I offer you a drink? I'm afraid it's your daughter's scotch, but since it was purchased with stolen money, I figure it's community property now." Eleanor's face went through several interesting color changes. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? A woman whose daughter is facing federal fraud charges?" I suggested. "A woman who was present during the planning stages of said fraud? A woman who might want to start thinking about hiring a good criminal defense attorney." That got her attention. Eleanor had always been the kind of person who thought rules were suggestions that applied to other people, but the word criminal seemed to penetrate even her titanium-plated sense of entitlement. Clarissa finally found her voice. "Mother, maybe we should." "Quiet," Eleanor snapped, not taking her eyes off me. "Adults are talking." She reached into her purse, a bag that probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months, and pulled out a checkbook bound in leather that looked like it had been harvested from unicorns. The kind of checkbook that belonged to people who paid for things like politicians and Supreme Court justices. $2 million, she said, placing the checkbook on the coffee table with the ceremony of someone laying down a royal flush. "To make this whole misunderstanding disappear." I looked at the checkbook, then at her, then back at the checkbook. "Misunderstanding? That's what this is," Eleanor said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a small child. "A misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. Clarissa made some paperwork errors, you overreacted, and now we need to fix it before it becomes a real problem." I picked up the checkbook and opened it. The balance showed more zeros than I was comfortable counting. Old money. The kind of money that had been accumulating interest since before the Civil War and buying influence since before electricity was invented. $2 million, I said thoughtfully. "That's a lot of money, Eleanor." For the first time since she'd stormed in, she looked relieved. "It certainly is. More money than you've ever seen, I'd imagine. Enough to set you up for life, buy a nice house, maybe start that business you've always talked about." The problem was, I never talked about starting a business. Eleanor was making the classic rich person mistake of assuming that everyone else's dreams involved money, because money was the only thing she understood. I tore the check in half. Eleanor's mouth fell open like someone had just told her the stock market had been canceled. What are you doing?" "Rejecting your bribe," I said, dropping the pieces into the empty scotch glass. "Let me make this clear, Eleanor. Your daughter didn't make a paperwork error. She committed fraud. Federal fraud. The kind that comes with prison time and orange jumpsuits." Eleanor's hands were shaking as she wrote another check. $5 million, she said, her voice higher now, more desperate. $5 million to walk away and forget any of this ever happened. I took that check and tore it up too. The sound of expensive paper ripping seemed to echo through the room like thunder. "Are you insane?" Eleanor shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Do you have any idea what you're trying to cover up?" I shot back. "Your daughter tried to steal $36.5 million from me. She lied to federal officials. She documented her crimes on social media like she was proud of them. And you think a few million in hush money is going to make that disappear?" That's when Eleanor's mask finally slipped completely. The polite, condescending tone disappeared, replaced by something uglier, more desperate, and infinitely more dangerous. "You stupid little man," she hissed, leaning forward like a snake preparing to strike. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family has connections in this city that go back generations. We have friends in government, friends in law enforcement, friends in places you can't even imagine." She stood up and began pacing around the room like a caged animal, her heels clicking against the marble with increasing agitation. "We can make your life disappear," she continued, her voice getting louder and more unhinged with each word. "Tax audits that go on for years. Building inspections that find violations you never knew existed. Background checks that discover irregularities in your employment history. We can bury you so deep in legal problems that you'll spend every penny of that lottery money just trying to stay out of prison. Clarissa was staring at her mother with something that might have been horror. Mother, maybe you shouldn't. Shouldn't what? Eleanor snapped. Shouldn't protect my family from this parasitic little gold digger who's trying to destroy our lives. She turned back to me, her eyes blazing with the kind of fury that comes from a lifetime of getting her way and suddenly discovering that the universe doesn't actually revolve around her bank account. That lottery money will rot in court for years before you ever see a penny of it, she snarled. We'll tie it up in litigation until you're too old to spend it. We'll challenge every document, question every signature, appeal every ruling. By the time we're done with you, the legal fees alone will bankrupt you. For a moment, just a moment, doubt crept into my mind. What if she was right? What if people with her kind of money and connections really could make the legal system work for them? What if I was just a naive working-class schmuck who'd stumbled into a game I didn't understand? But then I remembered Charles Whitmore's confident smile and Rosa Delgado's predatory grin. I remembered the stack of evidence they'd compiled, the surveillance footage, the social media posts, the financial records. Most importantly, I remembered the law, clear, ironclad, and completely on my side. You know what, Eleanor? I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked her daughter's stolen paradise. You're absolutely right about one thing. You do have friends in high places. The problem is, federal lottery fraud is prosecuted by the FBI, not your local buddies. I turned back to face her, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I felt completely calm. Charles Whitmore has been dealing with people like you for 30 years, I continued. Rosa Delgado has put millionaires in federal prison for less than what your daughter did. And the beautiful thing about federal court is that your country club connections don't mean shit when you're standing in front of a judge who's sworn to uphold the law. Eleanor's face had gone completely white under her expertly applied makeup. You're making a mistake, she said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. A terrible mistake. No, I said. Your daughter made the mistake. You made the mistake by trying to cover it up. And now you're both going to live with the consequences. I walked to the front door and held it open. I think it's time for you to leave, Eleanor. And don't bother coming back with another checkbook. The next time we see each other, it'll be in federal court. As they walked past me toward the door, Eleanor paused and looked at me one last time. You'll regret this, she said quietly. I promise you that. Maybe, I said, but not as much as your daughter's going to regret lying to the FBI. After they left, I poured myself another glass of scotch and sat back down in the living room that would probably be mine for the foreseeable future. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Eleanor Monroe had just threatened to destroy my life with her money and connections. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. Sometimes the people you think are powerless turn out to have the most powerful weapon of all, the truth. Rosa Delgado called me the next morning with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who'd just discovered buried treasure in their backyard. Darian, honey, please tell me you recorded that conversation with Eleanor last night. No, I said, immediately regretting every life choice that had led to that moment. Was I supposed to? Rosa's sigh was loud enough to wake the neighbors. Sweetie, if Eleanor Monroe threatened you the way I think she did, we just missed the biggest gift-wrapped piece of evidence since she started documenting her crimes on Instagram. That's when Charles Whitmore's voice came through the speaker. Apparently, they were tag-teaming this call like some kind of legal wrestling match. Don't worry about it, Darian. We're going to give them another chance to hang themselves. What do you mean? We're going to wire your living room, Charles said, like he was suggesting we order pizza. Professional-grade surveillance equipment, FBI-approved recording devices, the whole 9 yards. Then we're going to let Eleanor and Clarissa know you're ready to negotiate. The plan was so beautifully simple it felt like cheating. Rosa would coordinate with Agent Sylvia Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Apparently, Rosa had made some friends during her 12 years of putting rich assholes in federal prison. They'd set up surveillance equipment that could record a whispered confession from 3 rooms away, then sit back and wait for the Monroe family to come over and incriminate themselves. These people are arrogant enough to think they can threaten a federal witness in his own home, Rosa explained as she supervised the installation of equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. We're just going to give them the rope and let them hang themselves with it. Agent Martinez turned out to be a woman who looked like she could interrogate terrorists before breakfast and enjoy every minute of it. She was maybe 40, with the kind of steady eyes that suggested she'd seen every type of criminal stupidity imaginable and had stopped being surprised by any of it. The beautiful thing about rich people, she said while testing microphone levels, is that they think money makes them untouchable. So when they get desperate, they get sloppy. And when they get sloppy, they say things that put them in federal prison for a very long time. The surveillance van was parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck complete with magnetic signs, and a guy in coveralls who looked like he'd been fixing cable problems since the Reagan administration. Inside, Rosa and Agent Martinez would be monitoring every word, recording every threat, and building a case that would make Eleanor Monroe wish she'd stayed home and counted her money instead of trying to intimidate witnesses. Right on schedule, at exactly 7 p.m., Eleanor's Mercedes pulled into the driveway like a shark arriving for a feeding frenzy. Through the hidden cameras, I could see her in the passenger seat, gesticulating wildly, while Clarissa drove with the kind of white-knuckled grip that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. They came to the door carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my old car, and Eleanor was wearing the kind of expression that suggested she was about to negotiate the purchase of a small country. "Darian," Eleanor said when I opened the door, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we need to talk." I led them into the living room, where hidden microphones were picking up every breath, every whisper, every incriminating word. Eleanor set the briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the ceremony of someone revealing the Holy Grail. Inside were documents, legal papers, and what looked like enough cash to buy a decent house. Eleanor pulled out a thick folder and spread its contents across the table like she was dealing cards at the world's most expensive poker game. "These are tax documents," she said, pointing to papers that looked official enough to fool a casual observer. "Evidence of irregularities in your employment history. Proof that you've been defrauding the government for years." I stared at the papers, knowing that Rosa and Agent Martinez were listening to every word from their van down the street. "These are fake." "Are they?" Eleanor asked, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Try proving that in federal court while you're being audited by the IRS and investigated for tax evasion." Clarissa was sitting beside her mother like a scared child, occasionally glancing at the briefcase and then at me, like she couldn't decide whether to run or throw up. "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor continued, pulling out more documents. "You're going to sign these papers, which transfer your claim to the lottery winnings to my daughter. In exchange, we'll make these tax problems disappear and give you $5 million to start fresh somewhere far away from here." She leaned forward, her perfume choking me, her eyes cold as winter. "Take the money, Darian. Take it and disappear before we make your life a living hell. And if I don't," Eleanor's mask finally dropped completely, "then we'll destroy you. We have friends in the IRS, friends in law enforcement, friends who can make sure you spend the next decade fighting charges that will bankrupt you and ruin your life. That lottery money will sit in court while you rot in federal prison for tax evasion." She stood up and walked around the coffee table until she was standing directly over me, her voice dropping to a whisper that the hidden microphones captured perfectly. "We'll make sure your life is ruined," she hissed. "Your credit, your reputation, your freedom, we'll take it all away from you. By the time we're done, you'll be begging us to take the lottery money just to make the pain stop." That's when the front door burst open and Agent Martinez walked in wearing an FBI jacket and the kind of smile that suggested Christmas had come early. "Eleanor Monroe," she said, holding up her badge, "you're under arrest for extortion, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The sound of handcuffs clicking was like music to my ears. Eleanor's face went from predatory confidence to absolute terror in less than 2 seconds, while Clarissa just sat there making sounds like a broken air conditioner. "You set us up," Eleanor whispered as Agent Martinez read her rights. "Actually," I said, watching as more FBI agents filed through the door, "you set yourselves up. I just gave you the stage to perform on." As they led Eleanor and Clarissa away in handcuffs, Rosa poked her head through the door and grinned at me like a proud parent watching their kid graduate from college. "Not bad for a guy who used to fix cars for a living," she said. You just helped us record enough evidence to put these people away for the next decade. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The federal courthouse looked like the kind of building where justice wasn't just served. It was delivered with a side of marble columns and enough gravitas to make even hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching Charles Whitmore and Agent Martinez prepare to destroy what remained of the Monroe family's dignity with the efficiency of a surgical strike team. 3 months had passed since the arrests. 3 months of watching Clarissa and Eleanor's legal team try to build a defense out of smoke, mirrors, and increasingly desperate motions to dismiss. Their lawyer, some overpaid suit named Hamilton Prescott III, looked like he'd rather be defending anyone else for anything else, including war crimes and puppy theft. Clarissa sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed spectacularly with her complexion, while Eleanor wore the kind of designer outfit that cost more than most people's cars, but couldn't hide the fact that she'd aged about 10 years in 3 months. Both of them kept glancing back at me like they were hoping I'd spontaneously combust and solve all their problems. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Chun, had the kind of reputation that made defense attorneys wake up in cold sweats. She'd been putting white-collar criminals behind bars for 20 years and had apparently never met a fraud case she couldn't see through like plastic wrap. The prosecution will present its opening statement, Judge Chin announced, and Charles stood up with the confidence of a man who was about to shoot fish in a barrel with a nuclear weapon. Your Honor, Charles began, this case is about greed, arrogance, and the mistaken belief that money makes you above the law. The defendants didn't just commit lottery fraud, they documented it, celebrated it, and when caught, tried to threaten their way out of it. He gestured toward a screen where Rosa had compiled a greatest hits collection of Clarissa's Instagram posts. There she was, posing with the lottery ticket and declaring herself single and winning. There she was again, celebrating with her real family after kicking out her toxic husband. And there she was signing papers for her single girl mansion with money she'd obtained through fraud. The defendants created a digital evidence trail. Charles continued. That reads like a how-to guide for committing federal crimes. Then came the recordings from the night Eleanor had tried to bribe and threaten me. The jury listened in fascination as Eleanor's voice filled the courtroom, clear as a bell, threatening to destroy my life unless I signed away my legal rights to the lottery winnings. We'll make sure your life is ruined, Eleanor's recorded voice promised. Your credit, your reputation, your freedom, we'll take it all away from you. One juror actually shook her head in disgust. Another looked like he was taking notes for his memoir titled, Rich People Are Terrible. Hamilton Prescott III stood up for the defense looking like a man who'd been asked to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. His opening statement was a masterpiece of desperation disguised as legal strategy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, my clients made mistakes. Paperwork errors. Misunderstandings about complex legal requirements. But mistakes are not crimes, and misunderstandings are not conspiracy. It was like watching someone try to explain away a bank robbery by calling it an unauthorized withdrawal with aggressive customer service issues. The prosecution's case took 2 days to present and felt like watching a perfectly choreographed demolition. Rosa testified about the financial evidence. Agent Martinez explained the surveillance operation, and Charles walked the jury through federal lottery law with the patience of a kindergarten teacher explaining why we don't eat crayons. The defense case took about 4 hours and consisted mainly of character witnesses who testified that Eleanor had always been a pillar of the community and Clarissa had never intentionally hurt anyone. It was like trying to stop a freight train with a strongly worded letter. During cross-examination, Charles destroyed their expert witness, some consultant who tried to argue that the lottery forms were ambiguously worded, so thoroughly that the man looked like he wanted to change his name and move to another country. But the moment that really sealed their fate came when Clarissa took the stand in her own defense. Against her lawyer's obvious wishes, she tried to explain how she'd misunderstood the requirements for filing lottery claims. I thought that since I bought the ticket with my own money, she said, it was my lottery ticket. Charles stood up for cross-examination with the expression of a shark who'd just spotted a wounded seal. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, he said, emphasizing the hyphenated name. You were married to Mr. Hayes on the night of the lottery drawing, correct? Yes, but... And you used money from your joint bank account to purchase the ticket? Well, technically, but... And when you filed your claim, you checked the box marked single, correct? I was confused about. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, did you or did you not check the box marked single while legally married to my client? Clarissa looked at her lawyer, who was making the kind of face people make when they're watching a car accident in slow motion. Yes, she whispered. I'm sorry, could you speak up for the jury? Yes. Clarissa snapped. Yes, I checked the single box. But I didn't know it was illegal. Charles smiled. Thank you. No further questions. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, which I'm pretty sure was just long enough to elect a foreman and figure out how to fill out the paperwork. When they returned, the foreman stood up and delivered the verdicts with the solemnity of someone announcing the weather. On the charge of lottery fraud, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. On the charge of perjury, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant Clarissa Monroe guilty. Eleanor's charges took a little longer to read, mainly because Rosa had been thorough enough to charge her with everything from extortion to witness intimidation to conspiracy to obstruct justice. By the time the foreman finished reading, Eleanor looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of karma. Judge Chin scheduled sentencing for the following month, but she gave us a preview of coming attractions right there in the courtroom. Mrs. Monroe Hayes, she said, looking at Clarissa with the expression of someone who'd just found something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. You will be sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. Clarissa started crying, but not the pretty movie star kind of crying. The ugly, snotty kind that happens when reality finally catches up with you. Mrs. Monroe, Judge Chun continued, turning to Eleanor. You will be sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for extortion and witness intimidation, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Eleanor didn't cry. She just sat there staring straight ahead, like someone had just told her the sun was never going to rise again. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, exactly. I was still too angry for that. But satisfaction. Pure, crystalline satisfaction that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe actually made sense. Charles shook my hand in the hallway afterward. Congratulations, he said. You just helped put away 2 people who thought money made them untouchable. Rosa punched my shoulder hard enough to rearrange my internal organs. Not bad for a guy who fixes cars, she said. You just proved that sometimes the little guy wins. As I walked out of that courthouse, I couldn't help but smile. Clarissa had called me useless, but I just helped send her and her mother to federal prison. Turns out I was pretty useful after all. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of what used to be Clarissa's stolen mansion, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and redemption. The house was officially mine now. Court-ordered restitution for emotional distress and legal fees. Turns out federal judges don't appreciate lottery fraud, especially when it's documented on Instagram like a how-to guide for idiots. The mansion had been transformed from Eleanor's gaudy monument to excess into something that actually felt like home. Gone were the crystal chandeliers that looked like they'd been stolen from Liberace's garage sale. Gone were the marble statues of cherubs that seemed to judge you for existing. In their place was furniture you could actually sit on without feeling like you were defiling a museum exhibit. But the real transformation wasn't in the house. It was in what I'd done with the money. The Monroe Foundation for Fair Play occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that had once housed a payday loan operation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Charles Whitmore served as our legal counsel, Rosa Delgado ran our investigations department, and I got to play the role I'd always been best at, the guy who fixed things that were broken. We'd helped Grace Bennett, a widow whose in-laws had tried to steal her husband's life insurance money through forged documents. We'd taken on the Ortiz family, whose siblings had used fake signatures to steal their childhood home. Every case reminded me of that night Clarissa had looked me in the eye and called me useless. The mail still brought weekly letters from Clarissa, pathetic, rambling apologies that started with, "I've had time to think," and ended with, "I know we can work this out." I'd stopped reading them after the 15th one. Some mistakes don't get do-overs, and federal fraud is definitely one of them. Eleanor's letters were shorter and infinitely more entertaining. Demands for forgiveness from someone who'd once offered me $5 million to disappear. The woman who'd threatened to destroy my life was now begging for my mercy from a federal prison cell. I kept them in a folder labeled "Karma is a Beautiful Thing." Every evening, I did exactly what I was doing now. Stood on this balcony with a glass of good whiskey, watching the lights come on across the city. Sometimes I thought about the night Clarissa had told me to vanish from the face of the earth. How she'd called me useless. How she'd thrown $500 at me like I was a bellhop she wanted to forget. The lottery had given me $73 million, but more importantly, it had given me something I'd never had before, the absolute certainty of my own worth. Not the kind of worth that comes from a bank account, but the kind that comes from knowing you can take a hit that should have destroyed you and come back swinging. Clarissa had been wrong about everything, but she'd been especially wrong about one thing. I wasn't useless. I was the guy who'd turned her moment of greed into a foundation that helped people fight back against exactly the kind of entitled bullshit she and her family had tried to pull. The city lights twinkled below like stars that had decided to come down to earth and party. Somewhere out there, Clarissa was probably counting days until her release, planning her next scheme, dreaming of the life she'd thrown away for money that was never really hers. And somewhere else, Grace Bennett was sleeping in a house that was legally hers again, thanks to lawyers who didn't charge by the hour. That's the thing about true worth. It's not something you win in a lottery. It's something you prove when everything goes to hell and you refuse to stay down. Clarissa had called me useless, but I'd built something that would outlast both of us. And that, it turned out, was worth more than all the lottery money in the world.